He turned down $2 million. Nobody ever knew why until now. Rain tapped against the courthouse windows like it had somewhere else to
I'll see
be.
you again,
Victoria
brother.
Bennett slid the papers across the marble counter without looking
love
at
you.
me.
Love
2
you.
words. Sign it. The way you'd say, take out the trash. My name is Ethan Parker, 38 years old, auto mechanic, single father to a 7-year-old boy named
Can't
Noah.
believe it.
Noah
We
still calls my
finally
old
did
shop
it.
vacuum Gerald. He insists
Everything's
Gerald
gonna
has
be all right
feelings.
now, Mija.
He once left Gerald a get well card when I replaced the filter. I didn't throw the card away. I'm not sure what that says about me. I served 4 years in the military, came home, learned to fix engines, and then learned slower, harder how to raise a child alone after cancer, took my wife 3 years ago. Victoria Bennett runs a $50 million logistics company, corner office. Italian suits. The kind of posture that makes regular people stand up a little straighter whether they mean to or not. We were not equals. She made sure I understood that before the ink was dry. People talked, of course. Small towns always do. Some called it noble. Some called it suspicious. Daniel's uncle, red-faced at a church potluck not 3 days later, called it disgusting. A garage mechanic marrying into that family. No one knew the real reason. No one knew about Daniel gripping my hand in that hospital room. Machines beeping their slow, terrible countdown. His voice barely above a breath. Take care of them, Ethan. You're the only one I trust. And no one saw what I saw when I walked into that courthouse. A little girl, 6 years old, Lily Bennett, standing between her mother and me, holding one of our hands in each of hers, as if she already knew her whole world depended on neither of us letting go. She was wearing her father's old military pin on her dress. I had to look away. Here's what you need to understand about Lily before this story goes any further. She was 6 years old, and she already knew how to be still in a way most adults never learn. She didn't fidget at the courthouse. She didn't ask when it would be over. She simply stood there between us and looked straight ahead. Those wide, serious eyes. The eyes of a child who has already learned the world can change completely without asking her permission. But here's the thing about promises made to dying men. They don't stay quiet. They follow you into the kitchen at 2 in the morning. They sit beside you on the porch when the sprinklers come on at dusk. They wait. And 14 months after Daniel died, on a night so stormy, the oak tree out back lost an entire limb. Something happened in that mansion that Victoria Bennett, CEO, iron-willed and ice-eyed, had absolutely no answer for. Neither did I. Not at first. What changed everything would take both of us completely by surprise. Stay with me. This story is just getting started. In the months after Daniel died, I did what I always do when I don't know what else to do. I showed up. Not in any grand way. Nothing that would get printed in one of those charity newsletters Victoria's Circle passed around at fundraising luncheons. I just showed up. I brought dinner twice a week. Noah rode shotgun, still wearing his soccer cleats, usually with one sock missing. I fixed the leaky pipe under the kitchen sink that the housekeeper had been reporting for 3 months, and nobody had gotten around to repairing. I taught Lily how to press flowers in an old encyclopedia, the way my grandmother used to do with the flowers from her garden. Hydrangeas, mostly. She kept that book on her nightstand like it was something precious. Victoria tolerated me the way you tolerate a neighbor's wind chimes. Present, occasionally useful, mostly something to endure. She called me Mr. Parker for 4 months straight. Noah called her the Ice Lady, not to her face, thank the Lord, and once asked me, in complete sincerity, whether CEOs were a different species. I told him no. I wasn't entirely sure I was right. There were nights in those early months when I sat on the edge of Noah's bed after he fell asleep and just stayed there. Not praying exactly, just staying. The way you stay near a fire when you don't know what else to do. I thought about Daniel a lot during those nights, the way he used to laugh too loudly for whatever room he was in and never apologize for it. The way he'd call me on a Sunday morning just to tell me about something ridiculous he'd seen on the highway. We'd talk for 40 minutes about absolutely nothing. It was the best 40 minutes of the week. I thought about the last time I saw him laugh, 3 weeks before the accident. We were in my garage. He was helping me rebuild a carburetor, which mostly meant handing me tools and offering opinions. Then, completely out of nowhere, he said, "Ethan, if anything ever happens to me, don't let Victoria turn into a statue. She's not as cold as she looks. She's just scared. She's always been scared. She just learned how to make it look like armor." I told him nothing was going to happen to him. He handed me the wrong wrench and grinned. I think about that a lot. Then month 14 arrived, and everything shifted. Daniel's family had been quiet. Too quiet. The way a field goes quiet before a bad storm rolls through. Daniel's family had been quiet. Too quiet. The way a field goes quiet before a bad storm rolls through. His parents' old money, older grudges, hired a team of lawyers and presented a case to family court. Most of it was fabricated. Photographs of Victoria working past midnight. A carefully assembled record suggesting neglect. Meetings Lily hadn't attended. A birthday party Victoria had left early because of an emergency board call. Child abandonment. That was the case they were building. They wanted Lily. I knew what this was really about. Daniel had rewritten his will during his final weeks. His parents had expected control of the company. They didn't get it. Now they were reaching for the one thing that would hurt Victoria more than any courtroom judgment ever could. One rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of rain that makes you want to check the Tupperware lids and move the photo albums off the lower shelves, Victoria sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water beside her. A glass she hadn't touched. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept properly in 2 months. She probably hadn't. Ethan. It was the first time she'd used my first name, just that. Then a pause. Will you marry me? She said it the way someone reads a legal document aloud. Flat, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it 6 times in front of a bathroom mirror and decided a 7th attempt would only make it worse. It's a contract, that's all. It gives Lily legal stability. It stops the lawsuit. It stabilizes the board. She folded her hands on the marble countertop. Daniel trusted you. I don't entirely understand why, but I understand that he did. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see it in her eyes. She didn't want to be asking this. It cost her something just to say the words. I thought about Noah asleep in the back seat of my truck, his head tilted against the window. I thought about Daniel's voice. Take care of them, Ethan. And I thought about Lily sitting on the kitchen floor the week before, pressing another hydrangea into page 312 of that old encyclopedia, working with the careful concentration of someone who had already learned that beautiful things need to be handled gently or they fall apart. I nodded. The wedding was cold. A law office, not a church. No flowers. Lily wore her best dress and stood between us, holding both our hands and smiling, completely unaware of every broken thing around her. But there was something I didn't know yet. Something Daniel's family had already set in motion. An offer made to me in secret 2 weeks before that courthouse day. Something Victoria was about to discover, and when she did, nothing between us would ever be the same. Lily's panic attacks came without warning. That's the cruelest thing about grief in a child. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you time to set down your coffee cup and prepare. One moment she's asleep. The next, she's screaming in a way that makes the entire house go still. Month 15. The storm that night rattled old window frames and made dogs nervous. Noah was spending the weekend at my parents' house. The housekeeper had gone home. It was just Victoria, Lily, and me in that enormous mansion, the kind of house that somehow felt emptier the more expensive the furniture became. I was in the garage fixing a neighbor's riding mower, a job I'd offered to do 6 weeks earlier and somehow never gotten around to, when I heard her. Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. I was through the side door before I even realized I'd moved. Victoria was already standing in Lily's doorway, both hands pressed flat against the frame, the posture of someone who desperately wants to help and has suddenly discovered she doesn't know how. Lily was curled against the headboard, clutching a worn teddy bear with one missing button eye, Daniel's bear. She hadn't let it out of her sight in 15 months. Victoria took a step forward. Lily pulled away. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even rejection, not really. It was simply a 6-year-old's grief, raw, directionless, and enormous, landing in the only place grief ever lands, wherever the wound already is. Victoria stepped back. Her face didn't break, but something behind her eyes did. I saw it happen the way you see a crack form in old china. Silent, clean, irreversible. Something crossed her face that I don't think she knew was visible. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't even hurt. Exactly. It was the expression of a woman who had spent 15 months holding everything together, the company, the grief, the lawsuit, the pretending, and had just discovered that the one thing she most wanted to do, comfort her own daughter, was the one thing she couldn't seem to do right. She had the wrong tool for this particular job, and she knew it. I thought about what Daniel had told me in the garage. She's not as cold as she looks. She's just scared. I stepped past Victoria and sat down on the floor. Not on the bed, not next to Lily. Just on the floor, below her eye level, the way you sit near a frightened animal you don't want to startle. Then I started talking. Not about anything important. I told her about the time her dad and I were 16 and tried to repair his father's Ford pickup without permission. We got the engine back together with 2 bolts left over and spent 10 full minutes debating whether they were optional. I told her about the lullaby Daniel's grandmother used to sing. An old one, the kind that doesn't rhyme perfectly. Somehow that makes it better. I could feel Victoria standing in the doorway behind me. She hadn't moved. I hummed the tune softly, softer still. Then Lily's hand reached out through the darkness and found my sleeve. Just the sleeve. She didn't pull on it. She simply held it the way you hold a railing on an unfamiliar staircase, not because you're falling, but because it helps to know something solid is there. I kept humming. Lily's breathing began to slow. Her grip on the bear loosened just a little. By the time she fell asleep, her head had found its way onto my shoulder. I didn't move. I sat there on the floor in the dark while the storm drifted east, and the house gradually grew quiet. When I finally looked up, I found Victoria standing in the doorway, watching. She didn't say anything, neither did I, but it was the first time she looked at me, not through me. The next morning, Victoria made breakfast, not in the call the housekeeper sense. She actually stood at the stove, a little uncertain, consulting her phone twice. Scrambled eggs and toast. The toast came out slightly overdone. She stood at the counter staring at it for a moment as if she were deciding whether to file a formal complaint. Lily came downstairs, still carrying the teddy bear, climbed onto a kitchen stool, and looked at the toast. "It's a little dark," Lily said. "I know," Victoria replied. "Daddy used to burn toast too," Lily said softly. "He always called it extra crispy." Victoria looked at her daughter for a long moment. Her throat moved, then she placed the plate in front of her and said quietly, "Extra crispy it is." Lily ate every bite. I watched from the doorway with my coffee and didn't say a word, because some moments are too important to narrate. The next morning arrived with absolutely no grace whatsoever. Victoria's phone started ringing at 6:15. Then again. By the 4th call, I was already awake, making coffee the old percolator kind. The kind that sounds like it has opinions. A fleet of 18 transport trucks had failed inspection overnight. Faulty hydraulic lines. 6 delivery contracts in jeopardy. The deadline was 6 hours away. Her logistics team had been working on the problem since 3 in the morning. 20 engineers. No solution. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, and for the first time since I'd known her, looked genuinely frightened. "Can you—" She stopped and started over. "Would you be willing to take a look?" I set down my coffee, grabbed my jacket, and didn't wait to be asked twice. That's not a virtue. It's just how my father raised me. What I found at the warehouse wasn't complicated. A cascading seal failure, a common pattern in high-mileage hydraulic systems exposed to cold overnight temperatures, the kind of thing you learn to recognize if you've spent enough years underneath enough trucks. The military taught me systems. The garage taught me patience. Between the two, I had 4 of the 6 disabled trucks running within 3 hours. The remaining 2 took another 40 minutes. Every contract was saved. Victoria found me in the warehouse parking lot, wiping my hands with a gas station paper towel that was losing the battle badly. She stood there for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "How did you know?" I almost said experience. Then I thought about Daniel, the way he used to brag, genuinely brag the way fathers brag about their children, about every person they trusted. So I told her the truth. Daniel told me once, years ago, that if your fleet ever gave you trouble, I was the man to call. I tucked the paper towel into my pocket. He said it like he'd already planned ahead. Victoria froze. Her hand rose slowly and pressed against her chest, that involuntary gesture people make when something lands directly where a loved one used to be. The ice hadn't melted, not yet, but for the first time, there was water at the edges. What Victoria was about to discover about what Daniel's family had offered me before the wedding, and what I had quietly done with my own savings instead, would shatter those walls completely, and nothing between us would ever be the same. Month 16 began quietly. Noah lost a tooth and immediately started negotiating the going rate for the tooth fairy with the focused determination of a small claims attorney. Lily taught him her flower-pressing technique, and they spent an entire Saturday afternoon crouched over page 312 of that encyclopedia, shoulders touching, completely absorbed. The sprinklers clicked steadily in the backyard. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows in long golden beams. I stood at the sink and watched them. Daniel would have loved this so much. It was a Thursday when Victoria found the letter. She didn't come to me immediately. Later I learned she sat with it at her office desk for 2 full hours before coming home at 6:30. She set her bag by the door and stood silently in the kitchen until I looked up from the pot of chicken soup I was making. Noah's request. He'd had a cough for 3 days and was handling it with the dramatic flair of a man twice his age. Victoria held out an envelope. Inside was a letter from Daniel's family attorney, dated 3 weeks before our courthouse wedding. An offer. $2 million deposited into any account I named, contingent on one condition. I withdraw from the marriage agreement and disappear from Victoria and Lily's lives entirely. I remember the exact moment I read that letter for the first time. Alone at my kitchen table. 11:30 at night. Noah asleep down the hall. A cup of coffee growing cold beside my elbow. I read it twice. Then I folded it, slipped it into the drawer beneath the takeout menus, and sat there in the quiet. $2 million isn't an abstract number when you're a mechanic with a mortgage and a son who'll probably need braces before long. I thought about Lily pressing flowers into that encyclopedia. I thought about Noah's face the first time she laughed at one of his jokes, his complete, shining disbelief that someone had found him genuinely funny. I thought about Daniel lying in that hospital bed, his grip weak but certain around my hand. Then I threw the letter in the trash and went to bed. Now Victoria watched my face while I read it again. "You didn't take it," she said. It wasn't a question. "No. Why?" I placed the letter on the counter beside the soup pot. I thought about how to answer without sounding like I was giving a speech. I've never been good at speeches. I'm better with socket wrenches. "Because Lily needed medical care she wasn't getting," I said. "The pediatric anxiety specialist. Her doctor referred her twice, and nobody followed up. I used my savings and paid for 3 months in advance, so there wouldn't be any interruption." Victoria went completely still. "You used your—" She stopped. Her voice did something I'd never heard before. It cracked straight down the middle, clean as that old china. "It wasn't a sacrifice," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but wasn't entirely false either. It was simply the next right thing. She turned away and placed both hands flat on the counter. She stood there like someone who had walked a very long distance and finally, unexpectedly, reached solid ground. 2 days later, she called me into Daniel's old study. In her hand was a small black USB drive. Plain. Unremarkable. The kind of thing you find in a junk drawer beside dead batteries and expired coupons. "His attorney sent this after he passed," she said. There was a note attached. It said, "Do not open until 18 months." She looked at me. "It's been 18 months. Then she pressed play. The video had been filmed on a phone. Daniel sat in a hospital chair, thinner than I remembered, though I hadn't thought that was possible. But his eyes were exactly the same. Steady. Slightly amused, the way they always were, as though he'd thought the whole situation through and arrived at a conclusion he found genuinely interesting. He looked directly into the camera. "Brother," he said, "I know what's coming. You probably do too by now." He paused. "Victoria is strong. Stronger than she lets herself be, which is its own problem. Lily needs someone who'll sit on the floor in the dark and not make it about himself. I thought about every man I know, and I kept coming back to you. I don't know if you'll do what I'm hoping you'll do, but I think you will, because that's who you are." He looked down briefly, then back up. "Love them for me, Ethan. With everything you've got. The quiet way you do things, that's not a small thing. It never was. That's the whole thing." Static filled the screen. Then nothing. Victoria didn't try to hold herself together. She cried the way people cry when grief finally finds the door they didn't realize they'd been keeping locked. Hard. Complete. Without apology. I let her. I didn't offer a speech or a paper towel. I simply stayed. Eventually, she leaned against my shoulder, the same way Lily had that stormy night. Quiet. Trusting. As if she'd decided somewhere in the last 60 seconds that this was a place where she could finally be tired. The following week, during a board meeting, one of the senior partners, the kind of man who kept a golf trophy on his desk, where most people kept family photographs, made a comment. Something about optics, something about appearances, something about what it looked like for a CEO to align herself so publicly with a mechanic from the East Side. Victoria stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "The man you're describing," she said calmly, "paid for my daughter's medical care out of his own pocket, turned down $2 million to walk away from us, saved 6 delivery contracts in a single morning, and sat on a 6-year-old's bedroom floor in the dark until she stopped being afraid." She looked around the table. "He is not a liability to this company. He is the standard I intend to hold this company to." The room went silent. The CEO marries a mechanic story had been gossip for months. But the version that spread afterward, the real version, was something entirely different. And what Victoria was about to confess to me one quiet evening after the children had gone to sleep was something she had never spoken aloud to anyone. It was a Wednesday evening in late autumn, the kind of evening that arrives in the middle of an ordinary week and somehow becomes the one you remember for the rest of your life. The children were asleep. The house was quiet in that warm, settled way it had gradually become. Less like a showroom, more like a home. Something simmered in the slow cooker. Noah's soccer cleats sat by the back door. Lily's encyclopedia lay open on the coffee table to a page filled with pressed goldenrod. Victoria found me on the back porch. I was sitting in the old rocking chair, one of those heavy wooden ones that came with the house and creaked the same note every time. Reliable as a clock, I'd grown used to it. She stood in the doorway for a moment before coming outside and sitting on the porch step below me. She wore an oversized cardigan I was fairly certain had belonged to Daniel. For a while she simply stared out at the yard. Then she said quietly, "I was so lonely, Ethan. Just that. No introduction, no corporate structure. After Daniel died, I became the work. I thought if I kept moving fast enough, the grief couldn't catch up." She pulled the cardigan tighter around herself. "It caught up anyway. It always does." I didn't say anything. The rocker creaked softly. "I underestimated you," she said. "From the first day. I saw the coveralls and the truck, and I made up my mind before I really looked." She paused. "I've been looking ever since, and I just keep seeing more." I had carried my own confession for a long time. "I've admired you for years," I told her. "Long before any of this. Daniel used to talk about you the way people talk about the sun, like you were something to orient yourself by." I laughed quietly. I never thought I had any business saying that out loud. She turned and looked at me. "Say it again." So I did. She sat quietly for a long moment afterward. The rocker creaked. A moth bumped patiently against the porch light. Somewhere down the hallway, Noah was talking in his sleep, probably negotiating something. He was always negotiating something. Then silence again. "I don't know how to do this," Victoria said, not in her CEO voice. "In the other one, the real one, I know how to run a company. I know how to read a contract, win a board vote, and hold it together in front of people waiting for me to fall apart." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to just be someone." "Nobody does," I said. "You just decide to try." She looked at me suspiciously, the way she looked at anything that sounded simpler than she expected. "That's it? That's the whole thing?" She learned how to change the oil in a car the following Saturday. "I didn't suggest it," she asked. She appeared in the garage wearing old jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back, looking like she intended to master the skill before noon. Noah supervised with great seriousness. Lily handed her tools with the solemn importance of a surgical assistant. When the oil finally drained into the catchpan, Victoria stood up and stared at her grease-stained hands. Then she laughed. Really laughed. The kind that surprises the person doing it. "I always thought this world was beneath mine," she said softly, "but it's the one that taught me everything that actually matters." That night at dinner, Noah was explaining a complicated theory involving Gerald the vacuum cleaner, while Lily carefully described the Latin name for goldenrod she had recently looked up and taken very seriously. Victoria reached across the table and took my hand. Then something happened that none of us planned. Noah looked at Lily, Lily looked at Noah, and in one of those moments you can never choreograph, Noah said, "Mom, can you pass the rolls?" At exactly the same time, Lily looked at me and asked, "Dad, can I have more soup?" The entire table froze. The entire table froze. Two children who had each lost something enormous had, without discussion or ceremony, quietly decided to fill the empty spaces with something new. Noah recovered first. He picked up the basket of rolls store-bought because it was a Tuesday and I hadn't planned ahead and handed it to Victoria with great dignity. "Your mom now," he said with the settled confidence of someone who had considered the matter thoroughly and reached a final decision. Lily looked at me with those serious dark eyes and said simply, "You were already Dad. I just hadn't said it yet." I had to lower my eyes to my soup bowl for a moment. Not because I was sad, because of something that doesn't really have a name. That feeling that comes when something broken finishes healing and you realize you almost missed the exact moment it happened. Victoria's hand found mine beneath the table. She squeezed once. I squeezed back. The rolls were a little stale. The soup was slightly too salty. The kitchen light had been flickering for a week, and I kept forgetting to change the bulb. It was the best dinner I had ever sat down to, but the most extraordinary thing hadn't happened yet. 6 months later, in month 18, something happened on an ordinary picnic afternoon that neither of us saw coming, and it would become the moment that made everything, the grief, the loss, the cold courthouse morning, every hard and quiet day in between, feel finally worth it. Month 18 arrived on a Saturday that had no idea how important it was about to become. Victoria showed up to the picnic wearing a t-shirt, no blazer, no heels, just a soft blue t-shirt and grass-stained sneakers she had borrowed from the housekeeper and never returned. She brought deviled eggs she had made herself using an old church potluck recipe she found in a kitchen drawer, written in someone's grandmother's handwriting on an index card stained by a coffee ring. They weren't perfect. Noah ate 4 of them without a single complaint. I considered that a minor miracle. I spread a blanket beneath the old oak tree, the same one that had lost a limb during the storm back in month 15 but had continued growing just fine around the absence. I brought out a box of small toy cars, the kind with tiny hoods that actually opened. My father had given them to me when I was Lily's age. Lily and Noah crouched over them with complete concentration. Victoria and I sat nearby, close enough that our shoulders touched. I showed the kids how the steering linkage worked. Lily wanted to understand every single part. Noah wanted to see how fast the cars could travel down the slope of the blanket. "Both approaches are valid," I told them. Lily studied the mechanisms carefully. "What kind of job needs to know all this?" she asked. "Engineering," I said. "Maybe architecture, maybe surgery, maybe the kind of engineering that keeps bridges from falling down." She immediately asked 4 questions in a row, each building on the last, never waiting for me to finish one answer before the next question arrived. Noah watched her for a while, then looked at me with an expression I recognized. The expression of a boy who had recently acquired a sister and was still adjusting to what that meant. "She's smarter than me," he said matter-of-factly, with no jealousy in it at all. "Different kind of smart," I replied. He thought about that. "I'm faster, though." "You are definitely faster." He nodded, satisfied with that division of labor, and returned to his experiment with renewed determination. Victoria watched them for a long time. Then she spoke in that quiet voice she had discovered over the previous 6 months, the one underneath the CEO voice. The real one. "I've been thinking about the people at the company." I waited. "Some of them are struggling, really struggling, and I've been so focused on numbers that I didn't." She stopped and pressed her lips together. "I want to raise the floor for the lowest paid employees. I want to create a fund for people facing what I was facing, what you were facing. Family emergencies, childcare, medical expenses." She looked at me. "I know it sounds exactly right," I said. She had spent years building walls and had finally decided to use the same materials to build something better. "People still ask how we ended up here. They expect scandal. The CEO and the mechanic, the mansion and the garage. All that contrast people can't stop talking about. But the truth is quieter than that, simpler too. Sometimes love begins with loss, with a promise made beside a hospital bed, with 2 people who are both, in their own ways, quietly broken. And then discovering that broken things, when held with care, often mend stronger than they were before. Victoria no longer sees the distance between her world and mine. She sees, in her own words, spoken one morning over coffee on the porch, while the sprinklers ran, "The man who taught me that the only wealth worth having is the kind you give away." And I learned something too. I learned that kindness is not a small thing. It never was. Daniel knew that. He had been counting on it all along, and he wasn't wrong. Daniel knew it. He had been counting on it all along, and he wasn't wrong. If this story found you at a moment when you needed it, then maybe there's something worth remembering here. Not the greeting card version of kindness. Not the kind printed on coffee mugs and forgotten by Tuesday afternoon. The real kind. The kind that costs you something. The kind that means showing up with a casserole on a Tuesday night when nobody asked you to. The kind that means sitting on a 6-year-old's bedroom floor in the dark and telling stories until she isn't afraid anymore. Not because anyone will ever know about it, but because it's simply the next right thing. The kind that means turning down $2 million because a little girl needs a father more than you need the money. That kind. The kind my mother practiced every day of her life without ever calling it anything special. She never announced, "I'm being kind." She just left the porch light on for whoever might need it. She saved the last piece of pie for the person who looked like they'd had the hardest week. She answered the phone at 10 o'clock at night without complaint because someone on the other end needed to hear a familiar voice. When I was younger, I didn't understand that kindness was a form of courage. I understand it now. Noah asked me once while we were driving home from school. We were stopped at a red light when he turned toward me completely out of nowhere, the way 7-year-olds always do. "Dad, is kindness the same thing as being nice?" I thought about it for a moment. "Being nice is how you act," I said. "Kindness is what you decide when nobody's watching." He was quiet for a second, like when you fixed Mrs. Patterson's screen door and didn't tell her it was you. Something like that. He nodded slowly, filing the idea away for later. "Okay," he said. "Then I'm going to be kind." I kept my eyes on the road as the light turned green. "Yeah," I said softly. "Me too." If you're hearing this story today, maybe on a Thursday afternoon in your favorite chair, maybe while something quiet plays in the next room, maybe because someone you love sent it to you and said, "You should listen to this," I hope it feels true. Not because the names are real, but because the feeling is. Because most of us have sat at a table with an empty chair. Most of us have made a promise we weren't entirely sure we could keep. Most of us have underestimated someone, or been underestimated ourselves, and had to decide what to do with that. Most of us have been both Ethan and Victoria, the quiet giver and the person who hadn't yet learned how to receive. Victoria keeps the USB drive in the top drawer of her nightstand. Lily still presses flowers into that encyclopedia. She's moved on from goldenrod and is currently obsessed with mountain laurel. Noah decided Gerald the vacuum deserved a full retirement and has named the replacement something I cannot repeat in polite company. The porch rocker still creaks the same note. And every evening at the dinner table, two children who came from different kinds of loss sit side by side and are quietly and completely a family. This story reminds us of something we already know but too often forget. Ethan didn't change Victoria's world with a speech. He fixed a leaky pipe. He sat on a floor in the dark. He showed up on a Tuesday with soup nobody asked for. That's what kindness looks like in real life. So here's my suggestion. This week, find the little notebook buried in the junk drawer beside the dead batteries and expired coupons. Write down the name of one person who quietly showed up for you when you needed them. Then call them. Not a text, a real phone call. Tell them one specific thing they did that you never forgot. And maybe on Sunday morning, before the rest of the house wakes up, set their favorite mug beside yours on the counter. Not to grieve, just to remember. Because love doesn't stop existing simply because someone isn't standing in the room anymore. That's not a small thing. That's the thing. Kindness changes everything. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that second chances are real, that families can be built from loss, that love can find its way through grief, distance, and cold courthouse mornings, share this story with them. Because sometimes the family you never planned for turns out to be the family you were always meant to have. And sometimes it all begins with one person deciding to simply show up. There's a photograph on our refrigerator now. Not a professional one. Nobody arranged the lighting. Nobody told anyone where to stand. Noah took it with an old Polaroid camera he found in the hall closet and immediately declared the greatest technological achievement in human history. The picture is slightly crooked. Half of my head is cut off. Victoria is laughing. Lily is holding flowers. And somehow it captures everything that matters. Because in the end, that's what this story has always been about. Not money, not companies, not courtrooms, not mansions, just kindness. Quiet, stubborn, ordinary kindness. The kind that changes lives one small decision at a time.